Good evening. We want to welcome everyone here and those that are online to our Higher Praise update on things that's going on that may be pertaining to end of time specifically. So we will open with prayer. Lord, we thank you for our so many blessings. We're blessed with the weather, great growing weather for our farmers at this point in the summer, and we're so thankful for the rain showers and the green grass and the crops looking so good. Lord, we want to thank those that are working on our addition to the church. It's coming along, and so far everything has worked very well, and we appreciate the blessing you're going to give us with that addition so that we can serve our church members and our guests much more efficiently than we do today. Lord, be with us tonight. Open our eyes and ears and open our minds, Lord, and expand our wisdom and discernment. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we'll jump into, like we normally do, into the Mideast update. Not a great deal of earth-shattering things happen anywhere in the world at this point in time, but the thought occurred to me today that it's really interesting that there's so much happening in so many different places at the same time. That's the thing we've been faced with this summer. In the Mideast, we've been talking about ever since the United States left Afghanistan, how the terrorists are getting greater footholds in all of the Mideast. Part of this is being accelerated by the fact that, especially in Syria, Russia is pulling their troops out, sending them to the Ukraine, because that war keeps going on so long. Well, that creates a vacuum also, because Russia was the powerhouse in Syria, supporting Assad, President Assad and his regime. As Russia pulls out, the terrorists are stepping up their attacks on the Syrian army, which belongs to Assad, and they're also attacking the U.S. bases that are there. We have several bases, and they've been attacking that. ISIS seems to be the biggie that's really gaining in Syria at this point in time. They're not gone, that's for sure. It's getting bad enough that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain this week are asking their citizens to leave in those parts, especially Lebanon, but also in Syria. Lebanon and Syria both are just totally afire from the standpoint the terrorists are in total control of the countries, it appears. So, like I said, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain, that's Arab countries that's telling their people to leave. So that's a mile marker in my mind that even the Arabs are concerned with their citizens that they have in these countries. That's how bad it is. The PLF, which is the Palestinian Liberation Front, that's an older organization. They are really causing a lot of troubles in the West Bank for Israel at this time. And there again, we just see a concerted effort all the way around the border of Israel that the terrorist organizations, and there's even some new ones. I'm coming across some names I've never heard before. You have so many different factions of these people, and they are just really, really causing a great deal of trouble. And it's because, like I said, there's no leadership from the standpoint of a world policeman standing around to point a gun at somebody and say, knock it off. The United States set that up. Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, just left. I thought it was interesting to note that in the West Bank, they arrested some Palestine Liberation Front people the other day. Guess what their arms were? M16s. Well, those are United States M16s and probably come from Afghanistan. We left all that stuff, and I think we were talking about a week or so ago, the number one vehicle that the terrorists are driving now are F-350 Fords, and that's because we left hundreds, if not thousands of them in Afghanistan when we left. So it's really, the fire just keeps burning. It doesn't seem to go down in intensity. It just, every once in a while you have a flash. Israel's very busy. I read yesterday Israel has carried out 22 major airstrikes in Syria just this year alone. That's a lot. And Somebody hit Damascus the other day. Nobody took credit for it, but it looks like it was probably Israel, the outskirts of Damascus. Like I said, ISIS is alive and well. Assad's probably got some serious problems right now, maintaining his control over the areas he has in Syria. His days may be numbered if Russia's not able to come back and keep him propped up. I don't know where he picked up or not, but Biden paid ransom for 5 people in Iran. No other way to look at it. The White House don't want to call it ransom. It's a huge mistake because what it sets up, and there's so many of our past leaders have pointed out, when a terrorist organization or a terrorist country like Iran has your prisoners and you want to make some kind of swap, that's fine. You know, we do it. We've done it forever. Russia, you know, whatever. We will trade our prisoners for your prisoners. Well, what Biden did this time, he freed up $6 billion in Iranian money that was frozen in South Korean banks. When they put all these sanctions on Iran, that was some funds that was frozen in banks that was in South Korea. Shows you, see, and I want to tie that in here for a minute because it shows you where we're going to lose something else. This is a prime example, and I just now thought of it. I've talked before about why it's so important for the dollar to be maintained as the reserve currency of the world. Here's a prime example. When Iran and the United States or the Western countries fell apart on that treaty they had on the controlling the nukes, the United States, because the dollar is the world currency, was able to go to a South Korean bank and say, you will not ship that money to Iran. Well, since we have so much clout with the dollar, the banks didn't send the money to Iran, all right? That's been frozen until just this week, Biden decided to unfreeze $6 billion that's quote unquote supposed to be used for humanitarian needs only, okay? But that money's been freed to go to Iran. And here's the kicker. 5 United States citizens, and they're all, I think some of them may be dual citizens, I don't know, but they all have Arabic names. They're probably Iranians, but they have American citizens, which is fine. I'm not knocking that. These people were in prisons in Iran. Well, they're not coming home. All they did, Biden gave them $6 billion to take those people out of prison and put them under house arrest. All right? Yeah. So that's not reported either, but that's the way it was. Those people did not get on an airplane and fly home. They're still in Iran, still under arrest, and still have charges against them. But Biden gave Iran $6 billion to do that. It just, you know, you can't make this stuff up. I hate keep saying that, and you hear that all the time, but it's true. If you sat down writing fiction, you wouldn't write stuff like this that would be believable, but it happens. It's been a bad week for Christians in the Mideast, and multiple fronts. I'm going to give you several things. The one place that will surprise you is that Christian persecutions in Israel has taken off to the point that I know I read one of the latest instances. They were interviewing might have been a Catholic, I can't remember, but it was of a Christian church, and walking down the street and the people spit on them and call them names, and this type of persecution is going on in Israel, and it's really stepped up a lot. There's a lot of anti-Christian sentiment in Israel right now, and I think that's kind of something to keep an eye on. In Pakistan, they have had major riots. There's over 1,000 people that's homeless. There was allegedly a Christian that desecrated the Quran, and they used that as an excuse. I think they burnt 500 homes, something like that. Killed a lot of people. But they just had mass. They said there was 10,000 people that rioted against the Christians. These are Muslims rioting against Christian communities because somebody desecrated the Quran. They embarrassed Muhammad. And, there's zero tolerance for that over there. It's a criminal, it can be a capital offense. If you're brought into court, they may cut your head off or hang you or whatever because you desecrated Muhammad. Not allowed to do that. The other thing that's happened, Indians and Christians are at war in India, the country of India. There was over 100 people killed this last week in these clashes, and it's Hindus fighting Christians in India. The other thing that's going on, there's 11,000 Ethiopian Jews. That's not against Christians, but against Jews. But there's 11,000 Ethiopian Jews trying to leave Ethiopia due to the fact they're being persecuted by Muslims in Ethiopia. Africa's really really fired up. You're not hearing a whole lot about it, but there's a whole lot going on. Not major things, although you say major. I mean, 100 people murdered. That's a big deal. But there's just not been a good week for Christians around the world. That's about it in the Mideast. Pakistan economy is still having really severe problems. Some of these countries, we may start seeing, you've heard me talk before, and it's been months ago, and I really expected to happen before now, but it appears that some of these dominoes affect things we've talked about of one country failing, go take some more after. I think that's coming about. I really expected it before now, really did. I expected it to happen 2-3 months ago. We'd start seeing more of this, but don't believe the lies you're being told here at home that the economy's good, because folks, it's not. And I'll give you some more figures here in a few minutes. We'll shift up unless there's a question on Mideast. Anything going on? Anyone interested? Okay. Ukrainian war, we'll go up into Europe. The Ukrainian, of course, they were touting this counteroffensive against Russia. It was supposed to be a big deal. We're going to wipe Russia. We're going to drive them back into Russia. We're going to take back Crimean Peninsula. Well, it's not happening. And in fact, the situation's so bad that the Ukrainians are now evacuating all the towns along that battle line that's between Russia and the Ukrainians in Ukraine. There's that, if you look up, you can pull up a Ukrainian war map and they'll show you the line. They show the skirmishes. Ukrainians are pulling people out of that border line. And the reason being, this counteroffensive that Ukraine had, and NATO said, yeah, we're going to push Russia back and everything. It's not happening. It's a bloody mess. Russia got in and dug in deep. Russia mined so much, and the Ukrainians were just killing themselves trying to get through the minefields. They haven't been able to break through. They had some very minor gains in a couple of places, but the Russian line is held, and now it looks like the Ukrainians falling back. That's the reason Biden wanted to send them another $28 billion. Congress is kicking their heels up, but it wouldn't be surprised me to go ahead and send it. But they're out of, you're seeing, in this war, you are seeing one of the NATO guys slipped up day before yesterday. He come back the next day, apologized for his comments. But he made the comment that it was time for Ukraine to suck it up and start talking about peace and figuring out Russia's going to keep what they got and where's the line going to be. What his option was this: okay, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to let Russia have what they have. It's back to what I talked about, I know months ago. A plausible end of this war would be Russia keeps everything they've got, Western Ukraine becomes part of NATO, and in between you have a demilitarized zone like what we have in Korea. That I still think's what I read that. There was a general that I watched, I know it's been a year ago, and that's what he explained. He says, there's the way it's going to end. McGregor, I don't know if you guys ever follow him or not on YouTube, General McGregor, very, very sharp individual. And that's what he laid out, and it made perfect sense to me that that's the way it was going to end, because you've heard me say time and time again, I never thought Russia was going to get defeated in this. Now, they've sure taken a bloodbath in areas, but there's no way Ukrainians, even with NATO trying to feed stuff into them, was going to defeat Russia at their home front. Not going to happen. In my mind, I've never believed that. So I think that's where we're going to end up. McGregor was right. There'll probably be, but that's what this NATO official said day before yesterday, that Ukraine needed to get their head out and start thinking about how we're going to have peace. Because it can't go on. It can't keep going on. Russia has tightened the screws, and then NATO has too. There's two things going on. One down in the off Crimea and in Odessa and out into the Black Sea. Russia has kind of pretty much made it an embargoed area. And one thing that happened, I think day before yesterday, I forget, there was a ship that was flagged. I can't remember what country, but it was, I think it was a Far East country, was coming in on a shipment. Russia told them to stop for inspection. Ship didn't stop. Russia fired on it. Small arms fire. Of course, they had capacity to sink the thing if they want to, but they had a destroyer that opened up on them, and they stopped. Russia's kind of putting an embargo into the Black Sea. It's causing some friction between Russia and Turkey. Turkey, so much of their commerce depends on the Black Sea area on their north border, and but still, Russia's pretty much controlling the Black Sea, it looks like. The other thing that's going on, NATO. Now, remember we let you know a few months ago that Finland officially became part of NATO. Well, now the United States is shipping troops to NATO, to Finland, and they're being shipped along the border of Finland and Russia. And that's what Biden's been doing the last couple of months. They're shipping our soldiers over into Finland because they're now part of NATO, see. So the other thing I read, which is some interest, Finland is they are stockpiling. It's all where the European Union gave them $200 and some million to start stockpiling gear in case of a biologic war or a nuke war. So they can have equipment, protective equipment for their soldiers.
So what are the Americans going to use for ammunition? We gave away all the ammunition.
You get a good point. Yeah,
at them,
we should have bought stock in some ammo companies is what we should have done. Yeah, it's, it was just like, Trump made a comment, and I mean, sometimes he has good comments, most times or not, but he made the comment that Biden gave away a United States, what should be confidential or secret information. He said, hey, we're out of ammo. Well, you want to stand up and tell your enemies you're out of ammo?
That's treasonous.
Yeah, it's treasonous. Yeah, but you're right, John. We've really drawn our stockpiles down, and so time will tell what's going to happen there. Of course, Ukrainians demanding more money and more equipment every day. A lot of the European countries are drawing back on. The European countries, if they've got some people that can see the handwriting on the wall, and they know it's no sense throwing good money after bad. And that's what you're starting to see going on. So that's why I think some resolution's going to come about on that. We talked earlier, Biden, he wants to send them $28 billion more to Ukraine. That works out. When you work out what we've given Ukraine, it works out to about $900 per household in the United States is going to be taxed to replace the money that Biden has sent to Ukraine. And at the same time, he's willing to give $700 a household to the people in Maui that just got fired out. So how does that make you feel if you're someone who lives in Hawaii?
They're Americans, you don't care.
Yeah. That's the thing.
There's got to be some draft coming back.
We're definitely on the low end of the totem pole. And I mentioned NATO in the Western world is pushing Russia. They keep jabbing him. And that's like this thing in Finland I was just talking about, where we're putting troops up there, and they're equipping Finland as NATO member now, and that's right on Russia's border, and it goes against all the agreements that were ever made, going clear back to Ronald Reagan when the wall come down, and the USSR came apart. The agreement was, all those agreements was put together that NATO would not be on Russia's border, and now they are. So we're the ones that broke that. I mean, I'm not condoning Putin. You've heard me say this before. He's a terrible individual, dictator. But they can't put all the blame on Putin's table because we broke the agreements before he did. That's a fact. And that's just the way it is. Any questions on Ukraine or anything on Europe? Their inflation's still running pretty good, just like ours. That stuff's going to come to a head here real quick because and we'll talk a little bit about it here when we get over to the U.S. stuff. All these countries, that's why there's going to be a domino effect when somebody of any stature falls. Talking about a country that falls, there'll be a pretty good domino effect going to take place.
I do have a question about Ukraine.
What's that?
6 months ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene just raised all kinds of hell in Congress. So she wanted to know where the money was going. She wanted it all itemized, know who the money was going to. And they said, well, it's going to other countries. She said, well, what other countries? But as far as I know, nobody's ever given her an answer. What countries the money's going to, what the money's been used for, nothing.
Yeah. The question was that Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a U.S. representative, she had questioned, said, hey, want to know where the money's going to, all this money that's going out to these other countries. And John's right. To my knowledge, there's never been an answer given either. That's the thing that's so infuriating. We should have people, we should have like our senators from Indiana standing on the front of the steps of Congress demanding things take place. This stuff just floats under the table all the time.
And how much have we sent them in total? Does anybody know?
Pardon?
How much have we sent them in total? Does anyone know?
The total to Ukraine amount, the last I read was $102 billion. Is what's
the 28 billion you said?
That's without the 28 billion.
130 billion.
Yeah, is what a huge amount of money is going to Ukraine. And they did verify, you heard one little blip, and this wasn't too long after Greene had brought that up. There was an investigation done because two things. One, some of the arms that was going to Ukraine were found in Mexico with the cartel. Remember me talking about that? That's a fact. Well, when that happened, they had a little pressure on them. They ended up firing 4 or 5 higher-ups in Ukraine. A couple of them was generals because they were selling stuff on the black market. And so there's part of your answer, but nobody's followed up on it or anything.
You know Zelensky's a multi-billionaire.
Oh, yeah.
He's got money in offshore accounts all over the world.
Yeah. So, yeah, you weren't here, I don't think, at that meeting. There was a verified report come in. They found anti-tank weapons that the cartel in Mexico had that had went to Ukraine. Yeah. So it's sold on the black market. Probably never got over there. Probably got diverted as soon as it left states, went to the cartel. But yeah, it just makes you sick because they're driving our economy totally into the ground. And a lot of this is going on stuff that's going to come back on us. Talking about economy, the only thing I'm going to mention on China is a couple things. China is causing the Philippines a great deal of problems because they're both claiming ownership on a lot. There's so many islands. When you get into the South China Sea, if you go back, especially World War II, it's what took so long for the war in the Pacific to be over is because the Japanese held so many of these islands, and we had to fight that war island to island to island until they dropped the bomb. If they hadn't dropped the bomb, if Truman had not dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that war would have went on for another year and a half, and there'd been over another 1 million people died. That's the estimates. Because The Chinese were entrenched and all. There's just hundreds and thousands of these islands down through the South China Sea. Well, Philippines has owners. They claim ownership on some. China's claiming about all of them. Well, there's one island in particular that there's a rub going on. And here's the thing. I just read this week. If China moves militarily against the Philippines on some of these islands, the United States has agreement with the Philippines to come into the fray. So that's a flashpoint area down there that's going on. China's really putting a lot of pressure on them and on some of the Australian things. But the big news out of China is their economy. It looks like they've been fudging their figures a lot on unemployment, growth, things of that nature. You know how business is. Business is not good. And it looks like they've been hiding data. This figure come out, new development, that's would be talking about the house. They have the largest housing sector. Here's the way it works in China. We talked about this once before, but it's been a long time. In China, if you're going to buy a house, you go get the mortgage, and then you go hire a contractor to build the house. You start making mortgage payments as soon as you make that mortgage on that new home, but the home hasn't been built. So that's the way that works over there. It's a little different than here. Well, what happened, they had all this growth spurt going on, and these developers were developing houses knowing that the government really was kind of forcing. Do you remember when I told you about the young woman that had the child that she wanted to put in school, and they would not put that child in school unless she went and bought a house? Remember that? Okay, that's the way this system works. That's their social credit system they have in China. They can force you to do that because they control your pay. Well, that was going along fine while everything was growing. Well, all of a sudden, things aren't growing. People are laid off. They're not making their mortgage payments. Same thing that would happen here. Your little house of cards starts to fall apart. That's what's going on in China. New development, which includes factories development, new factories, new housing, is down 50% in a year. That's fallen off a cliff. The housing prices are starting to fall over there, which has not happened in years. So the other thing I know, in talking to some friends that we have, their family that are Chinese over there, there's no jobs. The unemployment rate I found this is where they're talking about, there's some data coming out that China, the government, has been hiding. One of them is the unemployment rate of youth is around 25 to 28% of their youth is unemployed. So you look at that factor, and everybody was expecting China to pull us out of keeping from going into recession or a depression. Well, the other thing that you look at, I was talking to somebody at the bank about this the other day. I come across the data. You look at how many what's the demand for shipping containers? And I'm talking about these big shipping containers that go on the big ships come across. It's fallen off the face of the earth. I mean, there's just almost no demand for this stuff compared to what it was. Well, why? Well, people aren't buying stuff. People aren't buying stuff. China's not making stuff, okay? That's, it's just the way it works. It's basic economics. And so China may be the one that if it really, that largest housing builder organization in China didn't pay their bonds. They're in default right now. They're not paying their debts. And they had a big one last year called Evergreen. Evergreen was the second largest housing development company in China. They went under last year. Now the biggest one's in trouble. So if that economy slides, and then that's where you start seeing the ripple effects. And you start seeing something like even a Pakistan, a Turkey, Italy. Italy's in some very severe financial difficulties. Germany's struggling. France is struggling. England is struggling. And so when somebody falls, It's just going to take that little teeter. What you're seeing here in the United States, I don't know where you picked up it or not, Moody came out this last week, downgraded 8 banks here in the States. 2 of them pretty local regional banks. I think it was, I want to get this right, Merchants, and can't remember the other one. But there's some of these large regional banks. Moody's is downgrading their financial rating. You know, the financial rating for the United States got dropped too. A lot of people didn't hear about that. But these companies that look and say, okay, they're either AAA or, you know, or AA or A- or whatever. The United States was lowered because of the debt, and these banks are getting lowered. And the big reason on the banks right now is that here is commercial properties here in the States, especially office buildings and shopping centers and things like that. One other thing on the office buildings, so these guys made these loans several years ago before COVID. Well, when COVID hit, everybody worked from home, and they don't want to go back to the office. And they're not. A lot of people are refusing to come back in these offices. So all of a sudden, these companies are finding themselves with all this extra office space, and nobody wants to buy it. So how do you still got to make that mortgage payment. And so that's what's coming to play on some of these big banks that have a lot of commercial real estate. They've got big problems. And the fact that they're borrowing from the feds to keep enough cash on hand to loan, but what's happened where we had a relationship of where the banks, there was enough margin difference to make some money, that's disappeared. Because do you realize you can borrow money from a treasury, you can borrow money for 10 years, let's see, I gotta get this right. Your 10-year rate is cheaper than your 3-year rate. Yeah. Stop and think about that. It's an inverse relationship on bonds, on treasury bonds. It's what they call an inverse relationship. An inverse relationship on bonds has always, no exception, triggered a recession. And, you know, it looks like we're definitely getting closer. We can talk about that a little bit. Moody's, which is a financial, reference firm, says we're spending $709 per month per household for basics and services. We're spending $709 per month more than we did 2 years ago. Average household. That's a lot of money. That's almost a house payment. You stop and think about that. $709 a month. And that's not going down. There again, you can go to the grocery store. I don't have to tell you. What gas do this week here in town? Yeah, $4 a gallon. We're right at $4 a gallon again now. At that same time, and this is something that's not talked about, especially from the Biden administration, there's been a 9% decline in wages in the last 2 years. So you've had prices of goods and services gone up, average household over $700 a month. At the same time, that household's taken, and we're talking averages, but they've lost 9% in their income. Bad situation.
On those gas prices, did they go up because of inflation, or they went through the Strategic Oil Reserve?
Both. Yeah, both. Yeah, they've started buying up and replacing the fuel that Biden took out before, which was a mistake at that time. They should. Of course, the biggest mistake is we're not producing our own oil, which we have the capacity to do. So anyhow, it's you got banks being degraded, countries being degraded, inflation's on the rise worldwide, and you've got a slowdown in the economy taking place worldwide. It's not just here, it's not just China. You look around the world. There's no bright spots in the economy right now that I know of. I'm no expert, but I read on this stuff quite a bit. There's no bright spots of economies anywhere. So it's not not going to be pretty. I still maintain we've got serious problems coming on an economic basis. Now, you stop and think, well, why is that important? For them to put in these digital coins or digital dollars, for the government to start taking over the economies electronically, this is what has to happen. And this will be the salvation. They'll come up with an argument that they'll be able to solve our economic woes by going to a digital dollar or a federal coin or whatever they're going to call it. Okay? That's coming. Everything's in place to make it happen. And that's what's going to happen. So as far as other things here, Russia's patrolling Alaska waters a lot more often. They've got some heavy destroyers and stuff up in that area. The other thing that's going on, I saw an article. It's really funny because I was just talking to Pastor about it the other day. He was talking about, somebody was telling him that, we was talking about some UFO stuff. And somebody was telling him that there's areas in the Arctic and Antarctic that you're not allowed to fly over and stuff. Well, that's not true. And I told him, I said, Russians fly across the Arctic all the time with the Russian Bears coming in on our airspace. And lo and behold, yesterday I saw a picture of a Russian Bear just off the coast of Alaska with a F-35 trailing it. We've done this stuff forever. It's Cold War tactics. And it's increased now than what it was. I mean, it had kind of fallen off and everybody didn't do much of it at all. But I go back into the late 60s and 70s when I was serving. It was a hot topic. And they're back doing it again. Russia's doing more and more as far as with ships now off our coast. China is sending some ships into the Gulf of Mexico off and on. And they'll keep doing that. The one thing I would tell you to watch for, I fully expect Biden to declare a national emergency over climate change. And they'll be using this thing in Maui as an example. And you're going to have, probably this weekend, there's going to be some major flooding in California because we haven't had a hurricane in California since 1939. Go have one this weekend. There's a hurricane coming up off the Baja, just off the coast of Baja. And it's going to come right up California coast and go right in, probably going to end up over Nevada before it falls apart completely. And it's going to put a lot of rain down. So you're going to have big mudslides, big rains. They're going to hype this, you wait and see. Haven't had a hurricane in almost 100 years in California. It's climate change. And, I gave you those facts and figures here a few weeks ago when they were talking about how many people dies because of climate change. And it's gone from 500,000 a year in 1922 down to, I don't know I can't remember my exact quote, but it was like 2,000 or some. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But they're not going to let up on this climate change thing. And I really look, the reason you can see the stage being set on that, what's his name? Not Blinken. Well, there's Podesta, who's a spokesman for it, and then there's one other guy. John Kerry? Yeah. They were talking about how this was supposed to be Inflation Reduction Act, where they've spent all this money. Well, they're touting now. That's almost all for climate. That's coming out of the administration. So I really look for Biden to declare a national emergency over climate. Now, I don't know what that's going to mean, to be honest with you. If you declare that, but okay, what's their controls?
I have a sister who lives in California, and she said they're talking about climate-controlled lockdowns out there.
Yeah, okay. Because John said that, he said, talking about in California, talking about climate-controlled lockdowns. Remember this UN thing that's coming together, where the UN's going to be the authority to estimate there's going to be a catastrophe that only they can control. They're going to call the shots, and that includes climate. And the other thing, which I pointed out a couple weeks ago, there's a big thing now is this climate change is causing mental illness. It's a medical problem.
It's affected all the politicians already.
Yeah, you got that right.
Yeah. I don't think people's going to go for this lockdown
Okay, let's talk about that a second. I didn't have any notes on that, but I got some thoughts on that. John talking about it said the average American people's had enough of this stuff. And I can tell you, the thought has occurred to me, we were out here working, no, I was doing the funeral dinner this week, Tuesday, and we were all in there talking about some of this stuff. And Dylan asked me if I had seen the latest music video that's gone viral on this guy what's the name of it?
Try that in a small town.
No, it's the one after. There's a newer one.
I didn't know there was a new one.
It's something about up in Virginia. It's something about
The guy with the red beard.
rich guys in Virginia or something. Northern Virginia, something. Anyhow, I can't remember the name of it. Those are protest songs. Try that in a small town. These things have gone viral. All right. What happened in the late 1960s, early 70s? Vietnam, those of us who lived through it. The protest songs. The protest songs were the spark. When those protest songs started coming out, that just blew up. I remember it so well. And I'm beginning to think we're going to see the same thing again. And here's the bad part. There is far, far too many people saying that we could have civil war in this country. And man, it just scares you to think about it, but you can see it shaping up.
Well, if we didn't have weapons, we'd already be in concentration camps.
Oh, yeah.
Vaccine,
Yeah.
Be in a camp right now.
Yeah. Yeah, the weapons that we have at home here in this country is the only saving grace that we have right now. And thank God He's blessed us with the ability to stay free. Because you're absolutely right, John. Without that, at this point in time, we'd probably already be under their thumb. So, it just occurred to me, these protest songs are really starting to just blow up. And you're starting seeing people push back. You're seeing quite a bit of pushback in areas. So, enough on that. Let's talk about the dark side being at work. The Disneyland, or Disney Company. You seen their latest? They have a series coming out. It's a series. It's a series on a young teen, or on a teen that gets pregnant by Satan. Okay? That's the storyline. She becomes pregnant by Satan, and they're doing a series on how this works out. True story.
There was a movie 40 years ago, Rosemary's Baby.
That was Mia Farrow.
Yeah, that wasn't a series.
Yeah, no. But this, they're doing a series for teens about this teen that gets pregnant by Satan. I tell you what, if you're not boycotting everything that's got Disney's name attached to it, you should be. That's the only way to kill this snake, is to put them out of business. And John was talking about, people's fed up with stuff. That's how you're going to have to deal with it. The only leverage we have on stuff like this is the money. And if we don't spend the money, they don't have it to go ahead and do what they're doing. But it's obviously Satan at work. There's no doubt about that. It's the dark side at work. That was what I wanted to point out. The other thing that's going on there is, everybody was so tickled when we got a Roe versus Wade ruling. And if you remember back when I talked about that last year when it happened, it didn't solve much. In fact, what it's done is created some new businesses. And one of them is these abortion groups are now forming companies that are shipping abortion pills, that are specializing in shipping abortion pills into the states that don't allow abortions. Big deal. And they're building abortion clinics on the borders. Prime example here is between Illinois and Indiana. They're building, and the governor's behind it over in Illinois, is we're going to build abortion clinics right on the state line. And that's what they're doing. They're making a new business out of it. So we've really not done anything. I think I commented before on that. All we did was regionalize the abortions now. We haven't slowed it down much. And that's sad. This stuff here is pretty good. I wanted to kind of end up on this a little bit. They did a study, the research on ChatGPT. And surprise, surprise, the research shows that it has leftist tendencies. They're saying, isn't that a surprise? Yeah, it's not even though they want to tout it that they have things in place to make it a neutral, ChatGPT is going to be neutral, AI is neutral. It's not. And this study here showed that. Now, further on it, the new thing on ChatGPT is they have Jesus online. You can go on ChatGPT and you can query Jesus with questions. And he will answer you. He will send you he can send it back. He'll send you a message back telling you an answer to what you ask him. All right? Now, if you join the premium version of this, you can then send queries to any of the figures you want to. Moses, Noah, Ruth, the apostles. But you can get, besides Jesus, you can get everybody else. All right? Now, here's the thing. It's all AI developed. And to give you an example, I'll give you an example of how it works in China. China has this too. Yeah. And give me a second here to pull it up for you. But yeah, ChatGPT has gone, we just talked about this a week or two or last month about that they were going to rewrite the Bible. AI is going to rewrite the Bible. PETA, remember PETA is the one that's come out with a new Bible version written by AI that involves animals, showing how animals, have such an important part to play in religion. Well, get this. Let's see. Here's a report. This is a report that's an example that the Communist Party version of John chapter 8, where Jesus challenges those who caught a woman in adultery to examine their own lives. We all know the story. Their version now states, now this is the Bible version in China, put together by AI. But see, that's what you're going to get with this ChatGPT when you send Jesus a question, or you're asking Moses a question, or Apostle John, or whatever. It's going to be done by AI, and it's going to have that slant. Okay, you can see how the devil's using this. The perverted version now states, Jesus once said to the angry crowd who was trying to stone a woman who had sinned, "He who is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone at her." When his words came to their ears, they stopped moving forward. When everyone went out, Jesus stoned the woman himself and said, "I am also a sinner." That is the Bible version of John chapter 8 in China on AI. That's what's coming in this stuff. Okay? I read another section where, let's see, was that on this one? Yeah, here's an example. It says, of course, it's a computer program and it acts like one. But this guy said he set it up so Jesus' characters tend to avoid taking offensive stances. Instead of taking an inclusive and tolerant line, everybody wants to be loved. Even though the Bible documents Jesus' adherence to absolutism regarding salvation. For example, on the idea of same-sex relations, which is forbidden in the Bible, this AI creation says it's up to each individual to seek guidance from their own faith tradition and personal convictions. That's how the Bible now reads, okay? Stop and think about what they've done here and how they're doing it. And you're going to have all these kids. See, that's what they're going after. They're not going after us. They're going after these young kids, these young people. And now you can read the Bible, and you could, this example here, you could ask Jesus, this ChatGPT, say, Jesus, what do you have to say about same-sex relations? And that's the answer you're going to get. It's up to each individual to seek guidance from your own faith and tradition and personal convictions. It's right out of the Bible. Jesus said it. Stop and think about this. It just blows me away. But it shows, you know, it shows you the power of the dark side, and which we always, you know, we've always been taught this, that the dark side that Satan will take and he twists and turns everything to try to turn it to his advantage. And I've never been struck so strong with that as to now, because man, this is big stuff. This really is. And you can see how it's all perverted. It sounds good. Sounds really good. You read that? Oh, yeah, man, that sounds, yeah. Makes sense. I mean, it just, you know, people can have a logical argument on this that it's right. And if you don't have an in-ground faith in the Bible being exact without any wiggle room, if you don't have that conviction, these people have a good argument. That's the danger. That's what's scary. And that's back to what I was saying, I think last time. You've got to be so strong in the Word. Everything we do now has to be by the book. It really does. You know, we need to start talking more about that term. You know, and we was in the service all the time. You ask a question, how you do something, you do it by the book. That's what the stance we've got to take now as a church and as Christians. It's got to be by the book, and you can't wiggle. You can't relent. You can't let up. You've got to refer back to that Bible. So, okay. Any questions on anything? Okay. Like I said, there's nothing earth-shattering. We just, you know, we reach out, feel so bad for the people in Maui to die that way. People died in their cars. It just swept over them. I was telling Pastor one time when I lived in Las Vegas for a little over 3 years, and I was taking my kids. We used to camp at Mount Charleston, which is south and west of Vegas. It's about a 7,000-foot mountain, lots of pine trees, very beautiful. We just go out there and camp. And I remember one time in a dry summer, we went out through Red Rock Canyon, Highway 93, maybe some of you have been on it. And you drive through Red Rock Canyon and you go out and you turn south and go up Mount Charleston. We went out there one time, and just as we turned off and started up, we could see there was smoke coming up out of a canyon. So we drove up, kept driving up, and there was some emergency vehicles that had passed us, water trucks. We drove up till I knew where there was a lookout point over that canyon, so I drove up there, and there was several other people already there. We watched that fire come up that canyon, and there was a strong breeze blowing. You get a lot of canyon winds out there with the right weather conditions. There is no way in the world you could have outdriven that fire in a car, let alone if you was on foot or something trying to get away from it. It shocked me. That's where I really got and I lived out west for quite a few years in different places in Nevada and Arizona and Idaho. I had such a healthy respect for fire after that, because it was just unbelievable how fast it just went up that canyon. And there was a road down through there. Somebody could have been driving on that canyon road. There's no way you would have outpassed, you know. I read later, they said the fire spread up the canyon 60 miles an hour. And you don't do 60 miles an hour on a winding canyon road. And that's what the people in Maui got faced with. They couldn't get away from it. And so it's a terrible, terrible situation. So let's end in prayer. Heavenly Father, we're talking about the folks in Maui, and our hearts and our prayers go out to them. such a terrible tragedy, Lord, that those folks died the way they did. Such a terrible death by fire. But we need to realize that that's what's facing all of us if we don't keep you in focus and we don't stay on the straight and narrow. You very explicitly tell us that fire is the ending if you do not accept you and try to keep your precepts and try to do the very best that we can every day. That a like situation could be for someone for eternity. So that should spur us, Lord, to talk to others and to try to bring them into the fold. Lord, as we talk tonight with the problems that we have with the AI being saturated with Satan's hand, that we've got to redouble our efforts, Lord, to stay true to the Word and know the Word and reference the Word and try to point out to people that the Word is the only thing that's never changing, and everything else other than your Bible, what you have taught us through it, is bogus, is deceitful, and is the wrong path. We ask, Lord, you give us strength and wisdom and discernment to be able to use that knowledge to help others find their way to you. Take us all home safely, Father. Bring us back Sunday and be with Pastor and Stacy as they put the worship service and the message together for Sunday. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.